In today's snapshot from our Sinner and a Movie series, I'll be sitting down with Dr. Greg Bottaro. He's a longtime friend, Catholic psychologist, and founder of the Catholic Psych Institute. We will be discussing, exploring, reacting to a hidden life. This is the Catholic Center Show. A hidden life. I think I'll just start broad. Why do you think it's called A Hidden Life? Why do you think that's the name of the film?
So this is directly related to why I connect with it so much, but it's this like intensely, personally interior journey, and it's like it's where we're all, well, it's where I feel very, very isolated. In some ways.
You feel like this
Why
is
are
a
you
movie?
laughing?
Does you feel like this is a movie about you?
Well, I relate to it.
Yeah.
I connected with it. But in an inspirational kind of way. It's
Sure.
like, if at times you feel alone in your convictions, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because God moves us individually.
Sure.
And there's a lot of balance needed for that. Because this sounds a little similar to everything we were just putting down as far as this intense narcissism and egotistical individualization. That's not the same thing.
Sure. But, well, I mean, we were just discussing how you had a lot of opposition to Catholic mindfulness and can anticipate future thought that you develop around psychedelics or maybe even AI that people are going to be very resistant to.
Right.
And are going to tempt you to leave that path. I mean,
Right.
that's one of the major themes of this film was, I mean, pretty much everyone you can imagine tried
Right.
to sway him from his conviction.
Yeah.
Even his wife.
Even his wife.
At certain points.
Yeah.
Subtly. But by and large, he had to stay firm in that conviction no matter what.
Yeah.
That is an extremely lonely experience.
Yeah.
Do you feel lonely?
I mean, yeah, it feels lonely sometimes.
Yeah.
But we make sense of that. It's original solitude.
Yeah.
And it's not lonely. It's not lonely, actually. It's a separation from people, but it's a deepening of an intimacy with God. And
yeah.
And at the heart of that space is the deepest intimacy. It's the opposite of loneliness.
Yes.
It's like the most connected you can actually be.
Yes. That I think the title of the film, A Hidden Life, implies that it is, and I think even throughout the film, the way that it's presented, the life of his interior life and the principle that you're talking about is very hidden.
Right.
I mean, it's a lot of stark imagery. It's not that much dialogue in the film. It's taking you from scene to scene, which elicits strong emotion, and which essentially gets progressively worse. I mean, it gets harder and harder to watch, leading all the way up to his
Right.
execution. Not my idea of a fun Friday night.
You asked the question. What movie?
All viewpoints are welcome on the Catholic Center Show. No, but it gets harder and harder and harder and harder. So from like a natural perspective,
Yeah.
it's just suffering that feels like death, that ends in death.
Yeah.
Over 3 hours. It's a 3-hour film. It's very long. It's long suffering. But hidden, and you only see slight glimpses of it, is him growing in peace
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah.
But you don't really see it. They don't articulate it. And even in the last scene of the whole film, the wife's prayer is, someday all of the mysteries will be revealed. Like, she still doesn't know why any of that happened. And so in that sense, it's a hidden life.
Yeah.
The spiritual life is very hidden.
Yeah. Until they were in the Vatican, until they were in St. Peter's Square at his beatification.
Right.
And then it's like, then it all becomes clear.
Yes.
The mystery was revealed.
Yes.
That's like he was living on a whole different trajectory.
Yes.
And he knew, because of his interior life,
Yes.
that this was as clear as day, that this is what God is calling him to.
Yes.
And he didn't need people telling him that he was doing the right thing, because he had that interior
His
conviction.
priest, his bishop,
Everyone.
his mother,
Yeah.
his wife a little bit, although she was pretty darn supportive overall.
Yeah, yeah, and she was. But like every bit of her pushback was also understandable. Actually, one of the harder scenes of the movie is when she was getting she's like tilling the field with the kids, and
The other kids were throwing rocks,
and they were being like ridiculed by the townspeople.
right? And he even said in his letter to them later, "I can't address what you have suffered for me." He's sensitive to that fact.
Yeah.
And he still stayed in his conviction,
Yeah.
knowing that choice, like, hurt his family, and he had to detach.
Right.
He had to trust God and detach from
Right.
even his family.
Exactly.
Brutal.
Brutal.
Brutal to watch, brutal to live with, upsetting. I mean, all the stuff about the kids and letting go of your kids, essentially, that was tough. And he was even tempted, one of the many temptations to part ways with his conviction was when his mother said to him, "You know what it was like to grow up without a father. Don't do this to your kids." So she's using even his own trauma
Right.
as a temptation.
Yeah. So twisted.
Very manipulative,
Yeah.
but with good intention.
Yeah.
The mother was with good intention.
Sure.
My favorite scene in the whole thing was when he was at the tribunal with the German judges, and they called for a recess. And one of the judges meets with him privately, who is obviously in conflict.
Yeah.
And he gave him the temptation that he had heard many times before. Do you think this will matter? That's one of them.
Yeah.
The first thing he says, do you think this will matter? This isn't going to change anything. And so that's easy for him. He's dealt with that one before.
Yeah.
But then he looks at him and he says, do you judge me? He got real with him. He
Yeah.
goes, do you judge me? He's basically acknowledging what this man was doing was right.
And it matters.
And it does matter.
Because it's changing his own heart.
Right. Do you judge me? And he said, no. I am not saying I am righteous and that man is wicked. And I can understand. He gives him empathy and mercy. He says, I can understand how a man basically got to where you are and made some mistakes and regrets it and doesn't know how to sort his life out. I am not judging you. All I know is I feel convicted. And that speaks to me of Thomas More. Thomas More, when he was being asked, the famous saint who was beheaded for not giving allowance to Henry VIII to divorce his wife.
Right.
And he stood up for his Catholic faith at the time. And he has a friend that says to him, just sign the paper.
Right.
Like, this doesn't bother my conscience at all to not sign this or to sign the paper. Just sign it, Thomas. And Thomas says, I'm glad it doesn't bother you. I'm glad. I am glad it doesn't bother you. And it's not part of your conscience. But if I sign this, I'm going to hell. If I sign this, I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
And it was, but what struck me about the scene was just the true compassion and mercy that he had for someone who wasn't, we could maybe even dare to say wasn't asked to make the same choice as him. It's how many, I'm always struck by this line by Pope Benedict when asked how many paths are there to God. And he said, as many as there are people.
Exactly.
Right? And so the character in this was called to a very particular radical way of living. Very radical. But that's not the only path to holiness.
Right.
That was his path to holiness.
Right.
And, I was, in my own development, I had my reversion, and in some ways I was inspired by very radical saints. The St. Francis's, even St. Augustine. They're almost like an archetypal image of Christ, and it's very obvious in very pronounced ways they're doing something radical to live for the gospel that all people can see. But there's lots of other people who live hidden lives. And in fact, that's kind of the point of the film. He wasn't a saint doing big things, like Therese talks about, I can't do these big things of the saints. I can just like really clean this toilet really well, like with big love,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And not everyone's path is this person's path, but that doesn't mean they're not doing God's will or striving the best the way that they can. And he recognized that. He's like, I'm not judging you. Like, that's between you and God.
Yeah.
Mother Teresa's quote, it's not between me and them, it's between me and God and them and God.
Yeah,
You know? I was just so moved by that, because in some ways I feel like, oh man, what am I, not going to heaven if I don't get crucified? Like, I don't know if I'm ready to be crucified. Like, am I being asked to be crucified? I don't know. I'm
also,
trying the best I can with what I have, but I don't know if I was, in Nazi Austria,
right.
if I would say,
That's the question.
say
It's
goodbye
like,
to my family.
we always think that way too. It's like, would I do that in that situation? And maybe it's okay. Like, it's a healthy thought process. It's like a fun thought experiment, or a not fun thought experiment. But
Yes.
at the end of the day, we're not in that situation.
No.
So there's no way to know what we're called to do until we're in the situation that we're in. And to your point, there are multiple outcomes that could be possible, and there are multiple paths that God is calling us to. I think this is really challenging for Catholics, especially, or I should say that it's challenging for everybody to think that it's okay that there are subjective paths in general. And the deeper we go in an interior life, the more that becomes okay.
Yes.
Which I loved in that scene, because he was really proving the peace, not just peace, but real charity.
Yes.
So he was connecting through his own personal transformation to a divine source of real charity.
Yes.
The way that Christ had in so many examples. So, but I think it's more like people say now, like with cultural sort of superficialities. With cultural superficialities, I think people cling to a movement or a purpose, and it's like this new agenda or this new thing, and it's like everybody should think the way I think, everybody should be clean energy, everybody should be saving the trees, everybody should be, and then it becomes this like thing where it's us versus them.
Yes.
And really, if you really push these things out to their extremes, they're filled with all sorts of inner contradictions.
Yes.
And they don't even line up. It's like getting on your jet to fly to the environmental, protest or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many inner contradictions that are happening all around us when these inspirations and movements and things are superficial. But the deeper we go, and the more sort of interiorly integrated we are, it's like, this is my path, and your path is your path, and I hope you're listening to what your path might be, but it's not for me to tell you that, because the only way that a person can have that kind of conviction is when they have an experience of how deeply interior it really is. And so
In one's own poverty.
sure, but it's like, that this is happening just in the inner movements of my own heart. Like, I don't expect everybody else to hear what I hear. And so how could I expect that I can hear what they're really hearing in their interior heart?
Sure.
So it's like one and the same. You kind of figure both out at the same time.
Yeah, we talk about how the moment you speak something out loud from your interior life, it's no longer an exact expression of what's going on interiorly.
Sure.
It's now interpersonal.
Yeah.
So no one can really access what that is like inside.
Right.
So how can we assess and judge where people are and what they're doing,
Right.
and the choices they make? It's hard enough to do it with ourselves.
I mean, even if it's hard enough to do with ourselves, and then even if we're walking with people, like in mentorship, I mean, you might have, years getting to know somebody, and their interior life pretty well,
And then be surprised. My mother says, I've been married to your father for 50 years and he still surprises me.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so like we don't know these intricate movements that are happening. And so when you see something like that, and it really speaks to, it's not only okay, it's actually good.
Yeah.
When to get to that place of solitude, and then like you are really following some deep intimacy and the conviction and in connection to God himself.
Yeah. Wasn't there, I thought there was a quote right in the middle which encapsulates the whole film, where he says, when you something to the effect of when you stop trying to survive, when you stop being attached to the idea of trying to stay alive, a new light floods in. That's the whole movie's about.
Yeah.
What would you say to those who have seen this film or are contemplating seeing this film, and it is explicitly Catholic, and might interpret it very differently? I mean, they may see him as a fool
Yeah.
or selfish.
Well, all the Catholics see it as a fool. I mean, everybody in the movie who is Catholic see him as a fool.
Right. So, I mean, but those who aren't Catholic, would you encourage them to see this? And what would you say to resistance to some of the themes that you pulled out?
Well, I think all of those resistances are totally understandable.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's why I'm making the point that even the Catholics saw it. It's not even like a difference in worldview that it's like, well, Catholics will understand this, but non-Catholics won't. The Catholics in his life didn't understand it either.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're a non-Catholic watching the movie, then I would say, like, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a movie about it for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually canonized, you know, he's actually a saint, like, or I think his beatification cause is open, or I'm not sure what the status is, but it's meant to challenge us. And so if you find yourself being challenged watching it, good. Like, we're in this together. Like, let's all be challenged on this together. And maybe let's look a little deeper and see, like, how could this be actually a beautiful thing?
How long ago did you see this film?
It was like 3 years ago.
Okay. I was wondering because I'm wondering if this is a me thing or a universal thing or a you thing where you started reducing your caseload about 3 years ago, right?
Well, I think I started reducing my caseload to develop our CPMAP certification.
Yeah, I mean well, even before that, you were reducing the number of clients that you see, right?
Yeah, a little bit, but not really until certification.
The reason I ask is because what we do is very hard to be in people's pain all day. I mean, it's obviously much harder for the people who are suffering, but
Yeah.
as a part of what we do, it's all day long of entering into people's suffering. And films like this are difficult to watch. They're challenging. When I get home at the end of the day, I often want to put on something lighter. I think this will probably my guess is that this will be one of the most raw and difficult films that someone suggests to watch on the Catholic Sinner Show.
Oh, good. All right. Well, at least we won something.
Yes. So, do you find that you are like, you've always been attracted to that kind of raw of a film? Like, do you how do you situate that?
That's a good question. You're like, why did you do this to me?
I'm trying to make sense of why you would ruin my show on the first episode. I'm kidding. But I do have that question though. Like, that is a question I have about, providers who are in people's pain all day.
I actually have a secret sort of inner desire. I might have shared this with you. I'm sure I've talked to you about this before, but we haven't talked about it in a while. But part of me wants to be an actor.
We've talked about it, yeah.
So, and I think that it's, for me, it's always made a lot of sense in the work that I do, because it means it's like as a therapist, as a psychologist, as a mentor, we're constantly sitting in the seat of receiving, and we can empathize, but it's really just about taking on and listening and receiving a lot of the kinds of burdens. For me, cinema and film is an acting out. And when I see movies, I see expressions of emotion and pain and suffering that are like going out in different directions.
But you're still in the receiving position though.
But I experience it differently. Like, I watch a movie and I enter into it. And I really connect with the characters and I really connect with the experiences. And it's not just like me receiving somebody else's pain, because I know that this is not a person. Like, it's an artistic expression. So even if it's a portrayal of a person, it's different than, if Jagerstatter was sitting in my chair,
Well, I'm a
and
little
actually,
confused. Makes sense because you said you're drawn into the film as if you're a part of the film, but there's
right.
another part of you that's like, this is just a film.
I feel a freedom of entering into it because I know at the same time that it's not the kind of reverence I have for sitting with a real person.
Okay.
When I'm sitting with a real person, I am just in like total receive mode. Like I'm just open to receive because of the implicit reverence that I have for the dynamic between me and the client. Whereas if it's a movie, like
You don't feel the same
I
responsibility?
don't feel the same responsibility.
Sure, sure.
And it's like, this is almost for me. And like, I'm experiencing this for me.
I see.
So
It
I'm
becomes
able to
personal
actually
you.
enter into it in a way that actually is nurturing me. So when I feel connected to the characters or I feel connected to the emotion, it might be the expression of a certain pain that I've had patients share with me before.
Yeah.
Or it might be the expression of a certain thing that I've wrestled with before. But it's all like watching a movie for me is a possibility for me to actually go out of myself. Does that make sense?
It does. That's not how I experience film personally. I can fully enter into a piece of art as if it's real. Like I'm there. I'm in that world. And so it's like I was there in Austria when I was watching that film.
Yeah.
Or I'm in Middle Earth, or I'm wherever it is. In fact, my criteria for whether or not I believe a film is good is whether or not I'm taken out of it, out of that experience. If I'm like, that's bad acting, or
Right.
that wouldn't happen,
Right.
or like that's not realistic. Now I'm like,
Right.
okay, like the film's capacity to pull me
Transport
in
you.
and keep me there
Yeah.
is my criteria. So I hear what you're saying. That's just not my experience. So for me, when I'm with clients all day, it's akin to and going into a film. It's like in some ways they're quite similar experientially for me. So I'm in their world as if that is the only world that imaginable. In the film, I'm transported. So
Yeah, I guess for me I feel a little bit more of like we talk about having one foot on the shore, one foot in the water with our clients.
yeah,
And so it's like kind of a parallel for me where when I'm with a client, I'm one foot on the shore, one foot in their world for their sake. And when I'm watching a movie, I'm one foot on the shore, one foot in the world, but it's for my sake.
that makes sense.
So I feel it different. Like I feel nurtured by it. Now, if it's something like super dark, this is one of my qualities or
Well,
characterizations.
Your first film that you suggested was about like an exorcist or like exorcism.
Yeah, and I haven't even seen it yet. So
Okay, great.
that was the other one. I was gonna watch it yesterday as well if
Yes.
you were gonna watch it, but I think I've watched movies that are so disorienting or so chaotic or so sort of so dark that
Yeah.
it's like too chaotic and it's too much that I don't. It almost like makes it harder to keep that one foot on the shore where I'm remembering my purpose and what's happening here and how I'm actually receiving something, or it's like so far detached from my experience that it can't possibly. It's not helping me. It's like I don't have enough access to that depth of my own shadow where this like horribly dark, chaotic movie is actually making sense.
Speaking to a part of myself that I can access right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although it may be there.
Maybe it's there. And then if I touch it, it's like too disorienting.
Right.
Even, you walk away from it and you're just like, I don't feel settled right now.
Set and setting. It's not, you're not,
Exactly.
you don't experience that safely
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
therapeutic sense. You know what struck me too about the film was, when I think of Nazis, I think of just absolute reckless, awful treatment of the Jews, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of depictions of how the humanity of the Jews was absolutely trampled over. In this film, there's some recognition of dignity because the main character was Austrian. He wasn't beheaded immediately for protesting. Like, there was like due process. And he was transferred between prisons. And I never saw that side of like the German experience during the war. or even the Nazi experience during the war. It's like they gave him ample opportunities to save his life. That was not offered to the Jews.
Right.
That struck me.
Yeah, I think there are differences, and it's hard to know. I mean, standing so far away from history, and depending on the accounts that you read and where things are being biased,
Right.
Historically, but there was definitely, I think, differences in the way that
People were treated.
Different people were treated, even if they were all ultimately under the thumb.
I mean, Nazis are so villainized now.
Right.
And so we just assume that they're like the embodiment of evil, and that's typically the depiction we get, which is fair.
Well, maybe they were like particularly towards Jews, and then like other groups got in the way, but they didn't have the same vitriol or the same sort of agenda.
Yes.
And so they had to stamp people out. They had to put them into camps. They had to do all these things because it fit their agenda.
Right.
But they weren't necessarily as interested in the widespread extermination
Of everyone.
in the same way.
That didn't agree. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting to see his humanity on death row. And it was, he wasn't just this pious, saintly, completely calm individual who was just like in touch with God on his way to heaven, no problem. Like, no, he was shaking, and he was absolutely terrified, and still to the moment of his last breath was still wrestling with attachment to life.
Right.
And you see that it was a strange moment where that other prisoner who's about to be killed kisses him
Oh yeah.
on the cheek. And my first thought is, well, is he homosexual? And then the main character kisses him back right on the cheek. And it's like, oh no, that has nothing to do with sexuality at all.
Right.
This is like two human beings who have no inhibitions. They're stripped down to the absolute rawness of being a person and having some moment of love exchanged in the darkest
connection
of moments. In the darkest of moments. What was your reaction to that scene, the death row?
Yeah, same. I just really, I mean, it just speaks to how good the movie is, like the art of the movie. And it's just when we could preserve connections to the human experience that I would imagine, ring true and are real.
Yeah.
It kind of is like, stories of like Joan of Arc about to be burned at the stake.
Yeah.
And then her initial thought was like, God has been appearing to me. St. Michael the Archangel appears to me, led me through battle against the enemies and, led me to victory. And here I am once again, and God will save me. And it's like when she could like smell her own flesh burning is when she realized like I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Right.
There's a little different take on sort of what that experience is like, but how could we not
It's human.
expect that?
Yes.
And so we could have a depiction of something that's so real. And then again, it's like validates the authenticity and the goodness of following a conviction.
Sure.
It's like we don't have to imagine that it's this wide open path where it's just easy, and it's like literally every step of the way.
Yeah.
He's catching flack for it from every angle.
Yes.
And to the end, it's to his own, from his own body itself, from his own self.
Yeah.
He's giving himself flack.
Yes.
If you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
And yet, conviction goes right through it and just pulls him through.
Now there's something transcendent within him, like he was tethered to.
Yeah.
Despite all the human experience and the human emotion.
Yeah.
The phenomenological.
Yeah, exactly.